Hey guys, so I figured today I would make a interesting video for you guys, something slightly different, less common, and what it is a 2017 Mercedes G550 4x4 squared, and what it is practically a G-Wagon on steroids. It is a car not too common, and one that, funny enough, not too many people understood as to why I got something like this. So we'll get into that. But from what you can see, it has a lifted presence, and you have some really wide fender flares, and you have about 2 shocks per wheel. And the most important thing is that this thing has portal axles. The ground clearance on this thing is, I think they said about 17 or more inches. It is a pretty Spartan vehicle. You have the trunk. Has a really nice thud when you close and open the doors. Let's go for a drive. This thing's got carbon fiber trim, which is in some ways hilarious because carbon fiber is usually associated with saving weight. In this case, you're not really saving anything. It's just more of a decorative trim. All right. So, where and how did I arrive at getting something like this? So, when this car first was released in 2017, and I think they only made it for 2 years, they only made 300 for the US. And I know for a fact that a couple of them have already been totaled. So there's probably 290 or so if none of those other ones gotten into any accidents. So this is definitely going to be a rare sighting. I've always, when I first laid eyes on this thing, I've always been intrigued by it. I love the way it looked. I've been in a normal G-Wagon. My friend had one. It's the non-lifted one, and it was it wasn't very comfortable. It was something where you couldn't really take turns in. You had to be a little more careful about the way you drove the thing. So where did I find attraction to this? Well, I think it started with the way it looked. It's a monstrosity, this thing. It's just so big. And actually it has so much character. I didn't even realize how much fun that this thing would be to drive. So my friend and I, we took his car out, and I remember him not being able to really take corners. The acceleration really wasn't that great. It would almost make you question as to why someone would buy a G-Wagon. So out here in SoCal where I am, it's a lot of people sort of relegate this to being a status symbol type of car, and I can kind of see where that comes from. I think some of the trendier places, some of the celebrities that drive this put that kind of stigma on it. So for me though, it wasn't that. For me, I just loved unique cars, and this really, really fit the bill. So the width on this thing is pretty extravagant with those carbon fender flares. I'm not quite sure how many inches it adds on both sides of the car. I will say that when you are driving it though, it is something you have to be aware of. because you can't really even see this, the carbon fiber fender flares from this driver's position. So you have to imagine that they are there. And that also translates to how wide or where your tires are, because you can't really see the carbon fender flares, and therefore you have no reference of where your tires are really. But it's not something you don't get used to. You do, and you just, you know, becomes kind of second nature by after a few drives. That also leads to the fact that this car is actually quite comfortable, even though at first it might be a little scary to drive because of its size. But actually the handling of this, if I can remember it, is better than what my friend's narrow body G-Wagon drove like. This car, being as wide as it is, offers more stability, and for some reason, I think maybe the extra shock absorbers, I'm not sure if that's the reason why, but it also adds to a more comfortable ride. It goes over bumps better. It still shakes. Let's not forget that this thing is actually still kind of a truck. It is got the lineage going all the way back to, was it the 70s or 60s? I can't remember, but I know the G-Wagon chassis has been around for a long time. And in fact, this chassis was just a continual refinement from the original one. The more current G-Wagons, they are completely redesigned. So this is something that's from the old ages and just kind of kept alive over the years by refinement. And one of the refined, I guess, parts of this car would be the seats. I think these seats are certainly very, I mean, they're almost like lazy boy seats because they're so big. This car has creature comforts in the ways of your navigation. You have, you know, AC that works. It's got pretty much the basics, so it doesn't leave you wanting for too much more. It's got ventilated seats, heated seats. What more do you need in something like this? So it's a pretty basic car as far as what its function offers. The only thing that is, I guess, special about this car is the fact that it's got the super high clearance for off-roading, which is something I actually do plan to do with this at some point. I just haven't gotten around to it. But as far as day-to-day driving, this thing is just a hoot to drive. It's when you drive this thing, it gets a lot of attention. Not that I care for it, but it does come with what this car is. A lot of people I've seen gawk at this thing, or they're out with the cameras taking pictures at this thing. And when I engage with the public of those who do approach me to discuss what this is, I find that very little actually know the 4x4 square comes from the factory this way. So most of them think that maybe it's an aftermarket lift kit that's put on this car, but that's not the case. And that speaks to the fact that it's extremely rare. Now, this thing right now I'm driving in is in comfort mode, which, again, it drives like a truck. So if you know what a truck is like, then kind of, you know, apply that to this. But you also, funny enough, have sport mode, which I've put this car in many times, and it stiffens the suspension quite a bit. Believe it or not, when the car is in sport mode, you can actually drive this thing like a Porsche, and I have. It handles actually quite well for being the size that it is. But what is somewhat limiting in terms of how or where you can drive this is that you have to watch where the heights of parking structures are. So this thing, I think, needs like a 7-foot 2-inch clearance, and I've seen parking structures that allow something like this to be in there, but many don't. So you have to be very, very conscious of where you're driving this car. But in terms of parking it anywhere else, not a big deal. It's just like any other car. So the height of this car is quite interesting too. Oftentimes I would drive this, and it's very seldom that there's anything really taller than you. I think I've driven past an Amazon delivery driver in one of those vans, and I'm still taller than his seating position. So it's got a very interesting ride height. It's not something that you would think could be a daily driver. I guess maybe just the way it looks kind of intimidating. But we use it all the time. I probably would say that this is one of the most fun and interesting cars that I have, and it's something that I drive almost daily. The only reason why I don't is sometimes I'll be driving the Escalade just so she gets used a little bit. Otherwise, that car just sits. But that car, by the way, the Escalade, I am actually just waiting for the Cybertruck to get here so that I could trade that in towards that. So what else can I tell you about this? Well, it's got a pretty good engine. It's got the twin turbo, I want to say 430 or 420 horsepower. It's got a lot of good pickup. You don't feel like you need more power, and in fact, if you really do feel like you need more power, I think you're absolutely nuts. This thing is just right in terms of having power to the way the chassis is set up. So you drive it with confidence. You don't feel like you're losing control with too much power, and you don't feel like you're underpowered either. It's just the right mix. The throttle is actually very responsive. When you're going up a hill, if you just pin the gas to the floor, it goes. There's no hesitation, and you don't feel like you're one of those people that need to move over to the right lane to let the faster cars go by. So that's surprising, I would say, when I took ownership of this car. I thought maybe this thing would struggle, but for everyday driving, it's got enough power. Now, the one downside, and as you can imagine for a car like this, would be its gas mileage. This thing, I find I'm filling up probably closer to once every week and a half to 2 weeks. And that's probably saying that I'm driving almost every day. But what do you expect, right? Twin turbo, this thing, I can't imagine what this thing weighs. I have no idea. So that's just something you might want to be, I guess, aware of if you're ever looking at buying something like this. Now, I will tell you that the ownership of this thing has been really, really exciting since I've owned it. Meaning that this car has provided a lot of fun and entertainment, just solely based on the way it drives. It drives like nothing else. But also too, I think it's one of those cars that gets so much attention, and I have a couple other cars that do get quite a bit of attention, but this one's just up there with it. Now, the ownership, however, though, doesn't come without some things worth mentioning. What do I mean? Well, so I bought this secondhand, and it was a car that when I first saw, I absolutely loved. And it was something I totally wanted right away. But when it was first released, these things were practically all spoken for. Even with an MSRP of $225,000, and then there was that one option where it was a solar beam yellow color, which was an extra $20,000 option, so it added to that price of $225,000 to about $245,000, I think it was. Even with those pricing, they were all sold out, and in fact, they were all sold out with markups. Generally speaking, I found the markups to be anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000, depending on which dealer you called. And so, these things were so limited that I think the dealerships called their top clients and offer them first look. And so it was very hard to find one sitting on a dealer lot available for sale. Most of the time it was already a flipped car where if they were available, people who bought them first, not only did they pay the ADM, which is the adjusted market premiums, they then added on theirs and then try to resell them. So oftentimes when this thing was relatively new, you would still see premiums and asking prices somewhere north of 270, even to 300, I think I remember seeing. So at the time, I just wasn't, even though I loved it, I just wasn't crazy enough to go spend 300 on a lifted G-Wagon. Anyway, I've been patient, waited. I have enough cars to drive, so it wasn't something I direly needed right away. But it was, well, look here. I have a Cybertruck coming up. See if I can share that with you guys. Right there on the left side. So cool. Can't wait for mine to get here. But this was a car that I waited for and ultimately got to purchase for under 200. Felt that the price was fair when I looked at the market the second time and pulled the trigger. But the point I wanted to get to is, as far as the ownership thing, is if you ever get this car, definitely buy one with an extended warranty. You have to, and I'll tell you why. Because after I purchased this, I took it to have it looked at, and nothing was mechanically wrong. But you remember how each wheels had 2 shocks? So this car has a total of 8 shocks, and they were practically all leaking. Now, I don't know if these shocks were built to handle something like this long term. I would assume that they were. In fact, these shocks were built by KW, which is a very good suspension company. But the fact that it leaked had to be addressed. And I don't know how the previous owner had treated this car. I've had a few professionals look over this independently, and both times they reported that the car was very clean, and that the condition of the car didn't suggest that this car was abused at all. If anything, I imagine this could have been just one of those cars where the wife or the mom used it to go grocery shopping or to the mall or what have you. So it was a very, very well cared for car. However, that being said, the shocks were leaking and they still needed to be replaced. So I had to go and take it to the Mercedes dealer. I don't think that there was really anybody else that sold these shocks. And as it turns out, changing all the shocks amounted to about $30,000. Now, I had purchased an extended warranty for about $3,000 at the time of purchase. That warranty covered that total bill, which was kind of a lifesaver, because I certainly didn't expect to have added another $30,000 to the cost of ownership when I first bought the car. So it was a godsend that I decided to go ahead and make that extended warranty purchase. Normally I don't, but in this case, for whatever reason, I did, and very, very happy that I did so. So that was the only thing that had to be addressed on this car. Otherwise, it checked out perfectly. And so I think this car is going to be around for quite some time. Anyways, that was the only hairy thing, hairy, scary moment that I had from owning this car, was being stuck with a bill that costed more than 10% of the price of this car. But it all worked out, and so here we are. Many miles later, this is something I still love to drive. And it's hilarious because as I'm driving right now, I'm seeing so many people just staring at this thing. But again, that's not the reason I bought this. It's just, I love this thing. And, you know, God forbid, but we got some pretty strong rain and had a few mudslides in the area recently. And so this thing can navigate through that kind of road condition, just about any kind of weather condition that it's been put through so far. And you know, I'm kind of glad that I had this. So I wanted to give you guys a little brief look into what it's like owning this. I guess if you guys have any questions, any thoughts, let me know. I'll be more than happy to make follow-up videos for that. In the meantime, enjoy the drive.